I'm about to lay down a tale so heavy with heart and hard truth, it might just leave you staring at the wall when it's done. This one's set in the unforgiving belly of the Wild West, where the sun hammers nails into your soul and every stranger might be your last. A land that don't care who lives or dies, only who's left standing when the dust settles. And it all turned on one moment. A big, battered woman crumpled in the dirt beside a fence small enough to ride past. But something in a man's gut said no. That single no lit a fuse nobody saw coming. Before we dive in, give this video a like if you're with me and comment below where you're hearing this story tonight. The sun hammered down so hard, the cracked ground seemed to pant like a dying beast straight from the inferno. Gideon Vex reined in his horse the instant he caught sight of a human shape crumpled against the split-rail fence. It wasn't some steer or stray dog. It was a tall, powerfully built Apache woman lying on her side. Broad shoulders, thick arms plastered with brick-red dust. The hem of her skirt was stained dark at the thigh. Blood had soaked through and crusted over in heavy, ugly smears. Bruises painted her skin in every shade, fresh purple welts riding over older yellow ones, layer upon layer. Her breathing was so shallow that only the tiniest rise of her chest gave her away. Most folks would have sworn she was already gone. Gideon sat his saddle a long minute without moving. This drought summer, everybody understood the rules. Meddling in reservation business was begging for a bullet or worse. A woman beaten this bad, that meant somebody was hunting her down. He swung down, knelt, and pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck. A pulse. Thin, stubborn, still fighting. Then the memory hit him like a branding iron rune. His kid brother sprawled in the sage after a pointless raid that nobody ever answered for. No justice, no reckoning. Gideon's jaw locked tight. Leave her, and she'd be cold by dusk. Help her, and the quiet life he'd scraped together would burn to ash. He slid his arms under her shoulders and knees. She was heavy dead weight and hot as a forge fever raging inside her like a trapped demon. Blood immediately soaked through his shirt. The coppery stink filled his nose. God damn it, he growled under his breath. He hoisted her over the fence and started the long walk across the baked flat toward the solitary cabin. The door banged wide the second he kicked it. Right then, the peace he'd guarded so hard shattered for good. Gideon eased Suna onto an old wool blanket spread near the stone hearth. Inside the cabin was an oven dust sweat and the iron tang of blood choking the air. He dipped a rag in the water bucket and began gently cleaning the crusted blood from her thigh. She gave a weak, pained moan. Her leg jerked once. She didn't come around. He stopped a moment. Those bruises weren't one-night work. Some had faded to sickly yellow, others sat deep violet, and a few were still raw and swollen angry, as if the fists had landed only hours ago. This wasn't bad luck. This was habit. Gideon rose, dragged his Winchester closer to the doorframe, and checked the loads. Outside, the merciless sun had bleached the prairie bone white. No breeze, no birds. Just the heavy hush of a land that had long since learned to swallow screams. He wasn't the type to chase trouble. Ever since Rune bled out in the sage after sticking his nose where it didn't belong, Gideon had lived by one hard rule: stay put, stay alive. Pick no sides, save no one, ask no questions. Rune had asked. Rune had stepped in. Rune ended up buzzard food. From that day, Gideon kept company with his fences, his cows, and the big empty. Folks only brought grief. Yet here he was carrying the biggest grief of all through his own front door. Suna's chest rose and fell in labored pulls. She was solid, built for hard days, under a hard sun, not the kind of woman who ran from fear. She'd run because staying meant dying. Gideon tossed another stick into the fire. The flames jumped, throwing flickering light across his sun-carved face, the gray stubble on his jaw, and the storm-colored eyes that had stared down too many consequences already. He never asked her name. Didn't care which band she came from. Too many details only made your trigger finger tremble later. Night crept in slow. The heat still clung like wet leather. Gideon sat in the rawhide chair, back flat to the wall rifle resting across his thighs. Sleep never came. If anyone was trailing her, they'd move after dark, and if they showed... He glanced at the unconscious woman on the blanket. A long, quiet breath left him. This time anybody wanting her blood would have to step over his corpse first. Suna jolted awake with a ragged gasp, like she'd been dragged up from black water. Her eyes snapped open, jet black, razor sharp, and raked the cabin in one heartbeat. For a second, her whole body coiled, shoulders, squared fingers, scrabbling for anything she could use as a weapon. Gideon stood a respectful distance away. He didn't step closer, didn't lift a hand to soothe her. He just stood there, arms loose at his sides, Winchester propped against the logs behind him. "You're in my house," he said, voice low and gravelly from too many campfires and too much dust. "Door's right there if you want to walk out." She followed the direction of his chin. The plank door hung half open. Beyond it, that the daylight burned white-hot heat rolling in like a furnace blast. She swallowed, her throat clicked dry. Her gaze flicked back and settled on the rifle. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice came out low, steady, but every word carried a warning. "Doesn't matter," Gideon Vex answered, voice rough as gravel under boot heels. "What counts is you're still breathing." Suna stayed quiet a long stretch, like the words had to be hauled up from some deep, dark well inside her. Then slow and deliberate she spoke. "I didn't steal anything. I didn't turn on anybody. I just ran." Gideon kept his mouth shut. She pulled in a shaky breath. He was drunk, same as always. Her fingers knotted tight in the blanket. But this time he didn't hold back. She eased her skirt up just far enough to show the ugly map of bruises ringing her thigh, some faded to dull gold, others fresh and furious red and puffed like they'd been laid on yesterday. 1 whole year she went on, voice flat but steady. 1 year without a child. He called me worthless. Gideon's eyes dropped to the marks. His jaw muscle jumped once, but his stare stayed level, quiet. No pity. Just seeing. "He drinks till there ain't a shred of man left in him," she said. "Still, the people call him my husband." A thick quiet dropped between them, heavy as wet saddle leather. Gideon broke it first. "I ain't holding you here. This place is only for mending up. Soon as you're strong enough, you ride out whenever you want." She studied his face hard, hunting for the catch, the hidden hook. Nothing. Just a tired man carrying a stubborn kind of backbone that didn't need bragging about. "What if they come hunting?" she asked. "Then they'll have to deal with me," he said, plain. She eased back against the rough log wall and let out a long, slow breath. For the first time since her eyes opened, the iron tension in her shoulders eased just a fraction. Not because the world had turned safe, but because for once, somebody had chosen to stand between her and the knives. Outside, the sun kept scorching the flats. And somewhere across that burning land, somebody was already following the red drops she'd left behind. When the bucket finally broke the surface, she braced it steady while he dipped 2 dented tin cups. They drank without a word. The water tasted of earth and iron warm, but it kept blood moving. The days after that fell into the same hard rhythm. Mornings for work, midday hiding from the blaze, evenings patching up things the years had let rot. Gideon never pressed her about Calyx. She never spoke of her people. Those wounds were old and private. Poking them only made the hurt bleed fresh. Nights stayed hot, the earth refusing to give up the day's fire. They sat on the sagging porch, one at each end, watching shadows crawl long across the grass. Crickets sang low. Far off, a lone wolf threw up a howl, then let it die. Suna spoke first that night. "Been a mighty long time since I've been close to a man." Gideon kept his eyes on the dark horizon. "Your husband, he was never a man," she cut in voice, calm, no tremble. Only a devil that crawled out when the bottle was empty. A hot gust swept past, carrying dust and the sharp smell of brittle grass. "I feel warm here," she said, soft. "Not from the walls, from you." Gideon pulled slow on his cigarette. Smoke curled lazy into the thick air. "And you?" she asked. "You feel a little less frozen?" He stayed quiet a long while. Then he pinched the cigarette out, still not turning his head. "I ain't much for talking," he said. "But I know what it's like to be the one left standing alone." She didn't answer, just sat there near enough that the shared heat of two living bodies cut through the night's stubborn grip. That night nobody reached for the other, but both of them felt it, something old and rusted starting to give way at the seams. Before the tale rides on, if you're tucked somewhere quiet right now, take a second. Grab a cup of coffee or a cold one, settle in. If these old Western yarns keep pulling you back, hit that subscribe button and drop me a word. What time's the clock showing where you're at, where you hearing this from? That night, the heat flat refused to quit. No breeze, no moon, nothing but black dark pressing down on the little ranch. Gideon lay stretched out on the creaky rope bed, shirt hanging open back, slick with sweat. Every time he shut his eyes, Rune was there again, sprawled in red dirt, mouth parted like he still had one last thing to get out before the light left him. Gideon sat up fast. Out on the porch, Suna sat braced against a weathered post, knees drawn tight to her chest, arms locked around them like a shield. The lantern's soft yellow light spilled across her strong frame, picking out the pale web of old scars that traced her shoulders and upper arms, silent stories of battles fought long before today. "Can't sleep either?" she asked without turning. Gideon shook his head, then caught himself she couldn't see it in the dark. He stepped through the doorway and eased down a short distance away. Not crowding her, not too far. "Too damn hot," he muttered. A faint laugh slipped from her soft, quick gone like smoke in the night. "I'm used to it," she said. "Back in my village nights, this thick with heat, folks drank to make the memories fade." She paused, voice dropping lower. Calyx drank to turn into something else entirely. Gideon didn't press. He had already heard plenty. She shifted, facing him now. Those deep, dark eyes held no fear anymore, just bone-deep weariness. "I don't want to be alone tonight," she said straight out. "No begging, no games. If you don't feel the same, I'll understand." Gideon dropped his gaze to his hands, big scarred, made for rope, and triggers, not gentle things. He thought of Rune, thought of how long this house had echoed with nothing but silence. "Come inside," he said. No more words passed between them. Inside the cramped room, the heat pressed close. They stood facing each other, stiff and uncertain, like two people who'd forgotten the steps to any kind of dance. Then Suna moved first, placed one palm flat against his chest. His heart thudded slow and heavy beneath her touch, every beat dragging old ghosts along with it. They came together without hurry, without greed, without pretense. Just two weary bodies reaching for something warm in a world that had gone cold and cracked. Afterward, they lay side by side on the narrow bed, close enough to feel each other breathing. No longer strangers in the dark. She turned her face toward him. Her voice came quiet as grass bending under wind. Thank you for not trying to make me into something I'm not. Gideon stared at the shadowed rafters overhead. Here, he said after a long beat, you get to be exactly who you are. Outside, the night stayed smothering hot, but inside those worn log walls, a small, careful mending had begun. Even if it was only the start. Next morning, the sun climbed like a fresh scalded blade slicing across the open prairie. No wind stirred, no clouds dared show. Just relentless heat beating down on every blade of grass and every inch of dirt. Gideon was out at the corral, before first light faded, checking fence lines more from habit than need. Near the gate, he spotted them, fresh boot prints, deep and hurried, not cattle tracks. He dropped to one knee, pressed a fingertip to the damp earth. They're here, he said low. Suna stood right behind him. She didn't need to ask who. She already knew. By noon, a thin ribbon of red dust rose from the west. Not a big cloud, just enough to say riders were coming. Gideon propped his rifle against a porch post. He didn't duck inside. Neither did she. 3 shapes materialized at the fence line. Calyx rode point, thinner now than she remembered, but the sour reek of whiskey rolled off him in waves, even from 50 yards out. Eyes red-rimmed, mouth curled in a permanent snarl, a skinning knife dangling loose at his belt. My woman, he bellowed, voice cracked and raw. Get your ass out here. Gideon stepped forward, planting himself square between Calyx and the fence. She don't belong to you anymore. Calyx hawked and spat into the dirt. Who the hell are you to tell me that Mr. Suna moved up beside Gideon shoulder to shoulder? She didn't duck behind him, didn't drop her gaze. I ain't going back, she said, voice steady and iron hard. You got no hold on me. Calyx's face twisted into something ugly. He lunged, yanking the knife free. Jet and Moss shifted to follow. It all went fast. Gideon cleared the fence in one stride, swinging the rifle butt down hard across the wrist that held the blade. The knife spun into the dust. Calyx howled drunk fury, making him thrash wild but sloppy. He swung a fist. It landed solid on Gideon's shoulder. Pain flared, but not enough to slow him. They hit the ground in a tangle of red dirt, sweat, and ragged curses. No pretty boxing, just grunting, clawing, raw breath. A wild punch cracked against Gideon's jaw. Blood bloomed copper on his tongue. But when Calyx twisted away, Gideon drove forward, slamming him face down and pinning his neck to the earth. Gideon's fist tightened. For one long heartbeat, the urge to end it right there burned hot. He saw Rune's face again, mouth open in the dust. Then he forced his hand open. He dragged rawhide from his belt and bound Calyx's wrists tight. Chest heaving, he looked up. Jet and Moss stood rooted hands, hovering near guns they didn't draw. Ride back to your chief, Gideon told them. Tell him I'll turn this one over. Suna stood watching, breath coming steady. Her eyes locked on the man who used to call himself her husband. She didn't tremble, didn't weep, just gave one slow nod. Out there, the sun kept pounding the ground, and this time, nobody could look away from what had been done. They rode into the Apache village as the sun slid low and bloody toward the horizon. No drums beating, no angry shouts, only swirling red dust and dozens of dark eyes turning to watch as Gideon pulled the trussed Calyx down from the saddle. Calyx still stank of cheap whiskey, head slumped forward, muttering slurred garbage that didn't mean a damn thing anymore. Chief Torv stepped out from the crowd, old as the hills, but his spine was ramrod straight and his eyes cut like freshly sharpened flint. He studied the trussed-up man first, and then shifted his gaze to Suna, standing shoulder to shoulder with Gideon. "What's this about?" Torv asked, voice low and steady. Gideon didn't speak. He eased back half a step, giving her the floor. Suna moved forward. Shoulders wide back, unbent chin level, she didn't drop her eyes for anyone. "This is my husband," she said clearly. "And this is what he's done to me." She lifted her skirt just past her knees. Then, slow and deliberate, she shrugged off her outer cloak, not to bare herself for shame, but to lay bare the truth, bruises stacked on bruises, old scars still raw underneath fresh welts, whip marks, knife cuts, faint burn scars etched across her dark skin like cruel handwriting. Not a whisper stirred the crowd. No one looked away. Calix jerked his head up, voice cracking in panic. "It's her fault she couldn't give me children. I birthed enough pain." Suna cut in sharp. Her tone wasn't raised, but it landed heavy as a dropped anvil. "You were never man enough to face your own failures." A thick, suffocating quiet rolled over the village. Torv stepped closer. He took his time looking at every mark on her, letting the weight of his silence burn into the people watching. "What do you say for yourself?" he asked the bound man. Calix dropped his head again. No bottle left to hide in, no mob to shield him. By tribal law, 2 warriors hauled him off. He didn't fight. No one lifted a voice in his defense. Torv turned back to Suna. "You can stay," he said. "The people will stand between you and harm." She looked straight at Gideon, held his eyes long enough to decide something final. "No," she answered. "I choose to go back with him." A low murmur rippled through the onlookers. Torv lifted one hand. Quiet fell again. He studied Gideon, then Suna once more. "This road you're taking," he said, slow. "There ain't no turning back from it." She nodded. "I know." For the first time all day, Gideon let out a deep, full breath, like a weight had finally shifted off his chest. Torv watched them both a long moment. A hot wind swept the open ground, carrying dust and the sharp smell of a hard day's sweat. "All right," he said at last. "You've made your pick." He faced the gathered people, voice quiet but carrying like distant thunder. "From this day on, no one touches these 2. Anyone who does is declaring war on the whole tribe. No whoops or shouts, just slow, solemn nods all around." The law was set in stone. Gideon and Suna rode out as the sun kissed the horizon. No one walked them to the edge. No one tried to bar the way. The red dirt trail stretched long and straight ahead. Back at the ranch, the same broken fence still sagged the ground, still cracked and thirsty. But the little cabin didn't feel hollow anymore. Next morning, they were at it, early resetting porch posts, deepening the well, swapping out boards gone soft with rot. They didn't hash over what happened in the village. They just worked side by side. A few weeks later, they stood together on the porch at sunset. No whiskey, no fiddles, no crowd. Just the 2 of them, the wide land, and a promise spoken low enough to last. The drought kept grinding on. But one morning, Suna stood on the porch a long time, one hand resting gentle on her belly. Gideon caught the look and understood right away. He didn't say a word, just gave a single nod like something overdue had finally shown up. The baby came strong, lusty yell, tiny fists balled tight. When Gideon took the child in his arms, he froze, hardly daring to breathe, if too deep, afraid the whole moment might shatter like glass. Suna watched them both, her gaze steady and calm, no trace left of the woman who'd once been thrown away. As evening settled, the light turned soft and gold. They stood together by the new mended fence, the baby sleeping deep in her arms. Gideon looked out across the parched fields. "Ain't gonna be easy," he said. "No," she answered. "But it's enough." They stayed like that a good long while. Words weren't needed anymore. The world out there stayed brutal as ever, but right here a home had taken root. Not just logs and nails, but choices made backs, turned on running away, and a price already paid in full. And that was plenty to keep living on. Some men never set out to be heroes. They just want a quiet corner of dirt to call their own, a life far from the world's noise and blood. But the wild country don't let anybody sit on the bench forever. There comes a moment when keeping quiet stops being neutral. It turns into a choice with weight. This tale ain't about riding in with guns blazing to crush the bad guy. It's about refusing to let the poison seep into your own veins, even when walking away clean costs you something dear. Gideon could have ended Calyx right there in the dirt. One squeeze of the trigger and it would have been over. He didn't. Not because he felt sorry for the man, but because he knew the truth. Spilling blood doesn't wash the world cleaner. It only adds another layer of darkness to the man who pulls the trigger. Suna didn't wait for a savior to ride up and fix her life. She rose on her own 2 feet, peeled back the cloak, showed every scar and bruise to the light, and claimed her place not where others told her she belonged, but where she chose to stand. That wasn't some grand uprising. That was a woman taking back the dignity that had been beaten out of her. The second someone looks their own suffering square in the face and says, "No more," the house of cards built on fear and lies starts to wobble. This story lays it bare. The law isn't always fair. The majority isn't always right. And real happiness doesn't come from the crowd clapping for you. It comes from having the guts to live your own truth, no matter who turns their back. The home Gideon and Suna built wasn't some shiny prize handed down from on high. It was hard-won ground, the result of refusing to look away, of refusing to kill. Just because the chance was there of refusing to stay mute when wrong was happening right in front of them. In the end, maybe choosing kindness doesn't flip the whole world upside down in a single sunrise. But it carves out one small, sturdy patch where folks can breathe, can heal, can keep putting one foot in front of the other. And sometimes hell. Maybe most times that's more than enough. The story you've been riding along with is fiction pieced together with a little help from artificial intelligence. It isn't meant to rewrite the past or twist history. It's just a way to sit back and picture that rough, unforgiving slice of the old Wild West again, where every day was hard, every decision carried a price, and people still found ways to choose something better. All I wanted to pass along through these scenes were a handful of plain old truths about kindness, about love, about the kind of courage it takes to stand up when everything tells you to sit down. Those things haven't gone out of style. They still matter every bit as much right now. If this yarn stuck with you, think about hitting that subscribe button to keep the stories coming. To every one of you out there who loves these classic Western tales, I wish you peace and good days wherever the trail has taken you. Drop a 1 in the comments if this one hit you somewhere deep. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals narration and script development, The emotional tone editing and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.